Okay, so this is the sixth and last of our weekly sessions. So, congratulations for making it this far. And since it is our last one, we should probably touch base a little bit about the logistics of doing the hands-on and the labs, the review. So, let me pull up my screen here. Um, I know we've set aside 3 days for the labs. They're October 1st, 2nd, and then the third day is the examination. So that's Friday. So that's Wednesday, Thursday. Now I've sort of left it up to your group here with SOPEC, because the reason we split you in 2 days for the labs is because really there were too many people to be comfortable with just one day of labs. You know, you wouldn't really get in there and be able to work with the equipment as easily as I want you to. So I want half of you to come on Wednesday and half of you to come on Thursday. But that's going to require you guys to figure out which half are coming on which day. Does that feel like it's under control, or is this all brand new and somebody's going, oh, yeah, we got to do that? So, um, anybody taking the lead on getting a sign up sheet and making sure not everybody shows up on Wednesday?
I think we've already worked the division out, and there's some need to get hotel rooms still for some people on Thursday night, but that's being worked on.
Okay. Yeah. And yeah, so that works out well for those who are coming from out of town from a distance to just do the Thursday, and then the locals can do Wednesday, Friday, no problem. Um, and and the Friday is not as full a day. Figure the lab day is going to take all day. We're going to try and get started about 8 in the morning. It will take you until 4:30 or so to get everything completed. We'll have to figure out about lunch, whether everybody's just going to go out or everybody's going to pack a lunch, or is there going to be some arrangement as far as food. It's often nice if you could just have some pizza brought in or something so that we don't lose people for all of that amount of time. We can deal with it, be done earlier if we take a shorter lunch. The same issue on Friday, a little bit with lunch, but less so because we're really going to work for 4 hours doing the review and then break for lunch, whatever form that takes. And then you have 2 hours for the exam. So let's assume we get the exam started at 1, should be done by 3. Many of you will not need the full 2 hours. So maybe be done by 2ish. So if you're coming from a distance, you've got that period of time, to avoid rush hour and all of that on a Friday. So Thursday, Wednesday, full days. Friday, not so much, and we can debate, or we can figure out from you all what you prefer as far as a start time. Do you want to get started on Friday at 8 o'clock so we're done earlier, or do you want to sleep in a little bit and start at 9 and get done a little bit later? So that's I'm flexible either way. It's kind of the will of the group. And this is going to happen at the Innovation Center. Is that right? And we've got the room all arranged. So I think we're all set there. So it's really just a matter of who shows up and what we do for lunch. Um, okay. So logistically, any other questions about the logistics for what we're doing? You shouldn't require, when you show up for the lab days, just wear comfortable clothing. All the tools will be provided by me. So you don't need anything except your attention, your good mood, and, don't wear high heels, right? Especially you, Michael. So that'd be problematic. Okay. So then on Friday, I'll have some calculators if you've got a calculator you like using. The only thing is we can't use your phone as your calculator because it can be used for other things. But if it's a standard calculator, fine. If you've got a Texas Instrument or something like that, I've got some cheapy little Dollar General calculators that we hand out. Scrap paper, don't write in the booklet, got 2 hours, multiple choice. The best way to prepare is to use the questions at the end of the exam or the end of the chapters. If you haven't run across it, there is a tool on our website called Quizlet, and that's a nice tool to use to review. It's basically taken all of the questions that are at the end of all the chapters, and they can be reviewed like flashcards. They've got little games you can play where they send them out. So it doesn't cost anything to sign up for that. So just go into our website, and in the right-hand column, you'll see a thing called Quizlet. Just click on it. It'll take you to the thing if you would rather review for using that. It's just a handy little tool. So that's you'll need to get a 75%. There are going to be 75 questions. The math often gets people worried. And out of the 75 questions, I'd say 10 of them deal with math of some sort or another. There's definitely going to be a voltage drop question or two. There's going to be string calculations. There's going to be sizing of an array, sizing of a battery bank. Those are most of them, maybe something about calculating ampacity. The thing you need to remember as far as before you get to the first electrical device, you take the maximum amps times 1.25, which is the National Electrical Code safety margin, and then you add another 1.25 if it's before the first piece of electronics for solar. And the primary reason for that is because those numbers that you get are based on standard test conditions. Standard test conditions assumes 1,000 watts per square meter, but we can have situations where the actual irradiance is significantly more than 1,000 watts per square meter. It can be, I've gotten measurements of 1,200 watts per square meter. So because solar is variable, they just say throw another 1.25, factor in there. But once it hits a piece of electronics like a power optimizer or a microinverter or a charge controller, well, now the output of that device is being monitored. So if you have variable amounts of power going in, doesn't really matter because the amount of power coming out is going to be regulated. So you don't have to put in that wild freewheeling extra capacity. Okay. So this session, really we're all the way down to chapters 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and of course 13, 14, 15 are almost throwaway chapters, just a little bit in there. So really, let me hit the highlights of chapter 10. I'm jumping in here. Before I get into that, does anybody have any specific questions for any chapters prior to chapter 10 or anything in the 10 through 15 that just was a little bit confusing? Anything? Okay, so when we get into chapter 10, we're really talking about mounting systems. And the mounting systems that we have are, let me see, you can do rooftop mounted systems. Well, one of the factors with a rooftop mounted system is going to be the fact that you have to have a rapid shutdown device on the panel. The main reason for that, and I know we've touched on it before, is when the power is shut off from the grid, the NEC wants to see that all power generated by the solar array is cut off at the panel, at the array itself. Because otherwise, a first responder coming and cutting a hole in the roof, for instance, to try and vent the smoke in a building might cut through a live wire and get killed. So they want to make sure that the system is not generating any power outside of that array boundary. Well, the only way you can do that is to put an electronic device on each panel. So if it's a roof-mounted system, you basically are going to be dealing with either an optimizer, a microinverter, or some other piece of electronic device if you're using a string inverter that provides that rapid shutdown functionality. And there are Tygo, for example, is a company that makes these kind of things for string inverters. So every rooftop system's got to have that. If it's a ground mounted system, you don't have to have it, right? And there's also some question, like for instance, if it's a garage roof, well, is it a detached garage? Some jurisdictions are going to require that you still have that rapid shutdown. Others may say, nope, that's not a inhabited building. Barns, another question mark. So probably best when you're designing a system, just assume if it's on a roof, you better put an electronic device on each panel. Ground mounted, not required. Then the other issue with rooftop mounted system is going to be setback. How far from the edge of the roof in each direction is the required setback. And the easy answer would be to say, okay, we need 3 feet on each side of the array, and we need 3 feet at the top, at the peak of the roof, and they don't really specify for the bottom at the eave, but we always say 16 inches. Put it 16 inches back. That has more to do with wind loading, so that the wind coming from that direction doesn't catch under the array and lift. So pushing it back 16 inches is going to help there. Now, that's the easy answer, but it's not entirely technically correct, because you can get around some of that based on how much of the roof is being covered and things of that nature. So at the top of the roof, you need to have 3 feet, but it doesn't all have to be on the same side of the roof. It could be, if you think of a standard peak of a roof, you could have 18 inches at the top on one side and 18 inches at the top on the other side. So in combination, you have 3 feet, as a walking area, just half on the north side, half on the south side. So, and you may not think that's a big deal when you're just sitting here in a class thinking about it. But when you're starting to try and put panels on a roof, and that difference is the difference between getting an extra row of panels on there and not, then it becomes a big deal. So just be aware of the setback. Now, I will tell you that the setbacks are not included in the National Electrical Code. They're included in the International Fire Code, or in any NFPA 1, which is the U.S. Domestic Fire Code. And that can be an important thing, because the inspectors typically are only looking at the National Electrical Code. So they many times miss the setback requirements, because most inspectors are pretty ignorant about solar. So they're looking at bonding and grounding. They're good at bonding and grounding. So if they catch on something, it's probably going to be a bonding and grounding issue, because they look at that all the time. So oftentimes it would be good to give them something to find, because they came out there, they want to find something. So give them something simple, give them something simple you can fix, like the little nipple on the grounding rod, and they say, no, that's the wrong type. And they go, oh, I just happen to have the right type in my pocket. Let's switch that out, and now they're clever and they caught you at something. So, that's something that they're going to look for something. Now, some of them, they just show up and say, everything okay? You go, yeah. And they go, okay, well, where do I sign? Those guys exist as well. But you'll see a lot of violations of the setbacks. We see this all the time. It's not good, but it happens. So, and that's just largely because the inspectors are not looking for it. Now, if you get into some of the rural counties around, Athens County is pretty tight as far as regulations. You get into some other counties, Greene County, really, really big on regulations. But you get into Morgan, Muskingum, Lawrence, some of those rural counties, they've got no codes, right? They really don't. In Muskingum County, they don't have electrical codes for residential properties. So they have no inspection. So that's just something to bear in mind. So when you're talking with your customers or whatever, realize it goes the whole gamut from overkill, like Greene County is overkill. Washington County. Yeah. I'm just trying to think. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I was going to say City of Marietta. Yes. City of Marietta has it. City of McConnellsville has it. I don't know when you get into the outer. I know McConnellsville's in Morgan, but because they're actually outsourced to, I think it's Southeast Building.
Regional
Um,
Building Department. Yeah.
yeah, and they charge a bunch and do very little actually. We've had inspections on our systems where they never came out. We just sent them, text them some pictures, so that was the entire inspection, where you just sort of say, here's the ditch, here's the buried cable, here's a picture, and they go, yeah, it looks good to me. And, that's that's especially helpful if you're having trouble digging a ditch and you can't get it 18 inches deep, but you can get like a 1 foot section 18 inches deep, and then you just put a tape measure right there and take a picture of it. That's a good way to get it passed. So yeah, so it's just all over the place. Most of them, the problem I've had has not been with the inspectors necessarily. It's really with AEP. Getting permission to operate, getting their system, their online system. The first time you look at it, it just feels like DOS 1.0. You're dealing with antiquated technology. I think it's purposefully antiquated. Then they'll give you some reasons why they reject your proposal that are just silly. Like in one place you didn't put your middle initial, and in another place you put your middle initial. So is this the same person? And now you got to reapply, and you're like, really? And I have a feeling the end of this year that's going to be a big problem. In order to qualify for the investment tax credit, you got to have permission to operate, from the utility. And we've got all these installers who are rushing to get these things done. And if AEP starts dragging their feet, who knows? There may be a lot of heartache. And I don't know, the assumption at the moment is permission to operate is going to be required to qualify for the ITC. I don't know if that's true or not. That's probably up to whether you get audited by the IRS and what that auditor decides. So if you can show production, even though you don't have permission to operate, well, first off, you're running kind of illegally, but otherwise, we do this all the time. When you start up a system, you start it up and you just want to see if it's working, and then you turn it off and wait for permission to operate. Well, you could take a screenshot while it's operating and just show, yeah, it's working. But then we had to turn it off, in order for it, so the rule says it's got to be operational. So you just showed it was operational. It wasn't operational on December 31st, but it was before that. So
It doesn't say it needs to be grid tied, though. Isn't operational?
yeah. Yeah, you could do that. Well, obviously. Yeah. Yeah. I think you got a strong argument. Just it was up, it was working. We tested it. Everything was good. First off, they've fired all the IRS agents. So what's your odds of getting audited? Take the deduction and beg forgiveness, All right. So we've got different things with the loads, the setbacks. That's a big issue. It's different. The setbacks are different for commercial, but this particular exam is really about residential. So that's in the book, but it won't be on the exam. Different types, the landscape versus portrait. Anybody have an issue? What's the reason why you would use landscape versus portrait? It really is a factor of the racking design. That really is it. Different systems you end up being, and when I say landscape versus portrait, I'm really saying this would be landscape, that would be portrait. That's just how they lay on the panels. Oftentimes with a rooftop mounted system, it's going to depend on which way the rafters are, that you're mounting to. If you've got a regular roof where the rafters are going north south, then your rails are going to be going east west. And so your panel is going to lay portrait. on top of that east-west. But if you have rafters that are going east-west, horizontal with the eave, and that's how our Earthship is built, then your rails would be going north-south. So your panels would be lying, like that. So it may not be the racking design, it might be the roof design as well. But ground mounted systems, I've seen them designed either or, portrait or so. So that's an issue. Torquing is an issue, of course. How often do people, maybe you guys who have had some solar experience, when you deal with it, and I guess I'm just sort of seeing Matt up there in the corner, how much do these installers worry about torque? It's kind of make it tight.
Yeah, I haven't really heard that as an issue at all.
Yeah, in theory, you get torque specs on every single connection, and you're supposed to set your torque wrench for the proper torque spec. But most of them are like, tighten it down, but not too tight. That's kind of what you do. Don't bust up the metal. Don't deform things, but make sure it's not loose. So torque is one of those where in the classroom we pretend like it's a thing, but in the field it's less so. But there will be loosening, vibrational loosening over time. So if you're talking about a maintenance issue, which is later in the chapters, that's something to check. If you're doing an annual maintenance inspection of your system, one of the things you're going to do is, maybe if it's an option, give it a good cleaning. You're going to clean it just using Dawn dishwashing detergent. That's kind of the best. You want it gentle with just a gentle sponge. Think of it like you're just washing an expensive car. Don't be abrasive with it. You don't want to scratch anything up. But these things, the word on the street is that these things rain will clean them. Well, rain doesn't clean them. It cleans it mostly, but pollen is going to be sticky, especially if you got oak trees around or whatever, and you'll be amazed just how much pollen sticks on there. And if you live along a dusty road somewhere, there's going to be dust on it. So give it a good cleaning once a year, and check all the wires, check all the connections, just jiggle things, see if anything came loose. It's just a good option. These things don't require a lot of maintenance. One thing that we just talked about in Solar Noon Tuesday before this is failure rates. We were just talking about comparing the major inverter systems out there in the field. So if you guys don't get a chance to watch Solar Noon Tuesday, I don't know if any of you were on it today, but all of these are recorded and they're linked on our website at Solar Noon Tuesday. There's some good information there, I must say so myself. But the major inverter brands at the moment, it has been a battle between SolarEdge and Enphase. That's been the battle in the residential marketplace. It's changing a little bit. SolarEdge just is falling off a cliff. They used to be the dominant player with the optimizers. They're down to about 10% now and falling, largely because they had some reliability issues. Prior to 2022, there was a lot of inverter failures. In fact, they were talking like a 30% failure rate. So you install 10 SolarEdge systems and 3 of them are going to fail in the first 6 months. And then you've got to go out as an installer and try and replace them. Well, SolarEdge did like exactly the wrong thing with customer service and tried to blame everybody but themselves. So it was the installer. Maybe you did it wrong. Maybe you didn't connect it properly. No, it couldn't be us. And it's a software problem, whatever. And eventually they'd replace it, but then the installers have to go out and actually, it's under warranty, but it costs them money to run. So eventually they got a bad taste in their mouth. So the guys who were really sold on SolarEdge just said, you know what, I'm not dealing with these, these yahoos. Enphase at the same time went from having a reputation of failure. Their M215s used to fail all the time. Then they got to the M250s and they were more reliable. Then they went to the IQ6, then 7, now the IQ8s. Well, they only have about a 1% failure rate. So that means out of every 100, you're going to have to replace one microinverter. All right, not terrible. 1% I can live with, 30% I can't live with. So, plus their customer service is excellent. So, Enphase became the dominant player, and they still are. But they're pricey. They're more expensive than the other guys. They're like the Lexus versus Toyota. So Toyota's still a good car. Sunny Boy, yeah, still code compliance, SMA, but not so big here in America. SMA is big in Europe. String inverters are not so big here in America, although with the exception of Tesla. And Tesla is now the second largest inverter in residential systems. And that kind of surprised me. This only happened in the last year or so, where they shot up and they're now like 30%, 32% of the inverter market share. And a lot of that is from Tesla Powerwalls. That's 100% where it comes. Some customer says, I want batteries. The only battery they've heard of is the Tesla Powerwall. They say, I want a Tesla Powerwall. The installer says, well, we could do I never heard of Enphase. So, I want Tesla. Well, then you as an installer say, well, you probably ought to put an Enphase inverter because they're compatible, they're proprietary. There's probably not going to be a problem. Plus, they're a little bit cheaper than the alternatives. So Tesla is the low cost solution at the moment. So Tesla's the low cost, Enphase is the high cost, and SolarEdge is in trouble. So that's kind of where we're at the moment. And all of these are now announcing bidirectional chargers, but they don't exist yet. We're still dealing in the world of vaporware. I mean, bidirectional chargers exist. They sure do. But they're not ubiquitous. Only certain models of cars are going to be using bidirectional, and it's the Nissan Leaf is the one. Still 25 years warranties on microinverters from Enphase for sure. Enphase just this week announced bidirectional charger by the end of last half of 2026. Of course, if you look back, they announced it in 2024, they announced it in 2025, and now they're announcing it for 2026. So take that with a grain of salt. But it seems like the standardized process for bidirectional charging, which has been the holdup. It's not been a technology issue. It's been a standardization issue. And that seems to have gotten worked out. And I think 2026 is going to be the year of bidirectional charging. So we need to be prepared for that as an industry to understand that everybody and their brother is going to want to hook their EV up as a bidirectional battery system. And we're seeing the emergence of virtual utilities, virtual power plants, where utility systems are paying you for sending power from your EV to them during peak load demand periods. So that's an issue. You're also seeing EVs could be used as battery backup, just like a battery, like a stationary battery. The downside, of course, is your EV is not always at home, so if you have a problem, that's a problem if your vehicle's not there. So usually they're going to be both. It's not going to be an either or. You're going to just get by with a smaller battery for your home, and then your EV can serve as the bigger battery for longer term power outages. So that's my guess of where that's going. But that's going to be a game changer. So all of these, and we're also seeing a move towards proprietary solutions. Enphase has already jumped straight into the proprietary solution thing. Tesla, proprietary solution. We're just seeing that as becoming the dominant thing. Used to be you'd buy mix and match stuff. Now you're just getting, with Enphase, everything's Enphase. Which is good, but it's also pricey. I think I can just say from solar PV training, from our perspective, I really feel we're going to start getting into the world of do-it-yourself solar for a lot of different reasons. One is that the price of electricity is going to go up dramatically, which we've talked about before. The availability of solar installers is going to be limited. We're already seeing that right now. In most parts of the country today, if you want solar installed this year, you're out of luck. everybody's booked, 100% booked through the end of the year. That's pretty much the way it is, unless you make it worth their while. So there's going to be a lot of folks who are going to want a simple solution for doing it themselves. And we're seeing that at the very beginning with these plug into the wall balcony solar systems, very small, where the only installation process is you just plug it into an outlet. That is at its most simple. But it just doesn't work for a system large enough to provide any meaningful power. Obviously with an outlet, you're limited to 15 amps or whatever it is that outlet is set for. So nothing's going to be more than that. But even so, you just can't set up 30 panels on a balcony, do it yourself, So it's fine if you want to do 2 or 3. But that's kind of the direction we're going to have to move, where these systems, we're in a situation here in the United States, comparing it with Australia. In Australia, you can get solar installed for $1 a watt. Installed, product, profit, permitting, everything. Here in the United States, we're 3 times that number. Why? Okay, well, part of it is tariffs, right? We're paying a 50% premium pretty much on product. But it's really the soft costs that are crazy. And so how do you deal with that? Well, you lower soft costs, So permitting, well, hopefully that's going to evolve through Solar App Plus and all of that. I don't see it moving that way. Our government doesn't really give it a priority at the moment. But if they do, we can get that down. But really, it's taking the exorbitant. Our market is basically low volume, high margin. We have to move to high volume, low margin. And how do we do that? Well, there's going to be a lot of ways, but at some point we should be dealing with solar installs that take half a day and the whole profit margin is $500. I mean, that's kind of where our install world has to move to in order to be, affordable to lower middle class, so. All right. So mounting systems, I'm sort of wandering but stop me if the designing standalone systems, chapter, 11, a couple of things in there. I think the main takeaway, of course, is we're dealing with sizing batteries. And I'll tell you, in the next version of the exam, because we've already got a committee to deal with that at ETA, we're going to begin to de-emphasize lead acid batteries and lead acid sizing of battery systems and all of that, because everybody is really moving to lithium ion. So there will be some embedded base, so you got to understand it a little bit. But really, when you're talking about sizing a lithium ion battery system, it's pretty straightforward. If I need 10 kilowatts of power, I buy a 10 kW battery. That's kind of sizing, all done. As opposed to saying, what's my daily load, divide it by the voltage of the battery, divide it by, depth of discharge, and get into all of those steps. Well, that's complicated and that's appropriate for lead acid, but all of that's already built into the calculation when they tell you the size of the battery. So a 10 kW will provide 10 kW. It already has depth of discharge built in, so that's not the issue. But the issue I was thinking about was with standalone, when you size an array for a grid-tied system, what do? It's kind of 3 steps, right? You take the daily load, kilowatt hours per day. You divide it by hours per day, right? You take hours per day, meaning hours of insolation, not 24 hours a day. So if you're in an area that's got 5.12 hours of insolation, given the orientation of your array and the angle and all of that, well, then I divide the daily load by hours of insolation, and that gives me the size of the array I need if it were 100% efficient. But it's not 100% efficient, so I divide it by the efficiency of the system, or the D rate. And if it's 90% efficient, I divide that by 0.9. Gives me a little bit bigger system because I lost 10% of it in transit. And that's how you size an array. Well, with that, you're taking the annual average of insulation, because sometimes during the year you're producing more, sometimes you're producing less, but the over the course of the year, it all averages out. That's what net metering does for you. With a standalone, there's no grid, so how do you design that system? And that's where in your book on page 314, 315, you start getting into, you look at it by month and you say, what is the insulation for that month? And what is the load demand for that month? And then we get a design ratio and we say, pick the worst one, because you don't have this unlimited grid to average everything out. So for instance, at the farm, our biggest loads were in the winter because we had livestock and you were dealing with heating water buckets and things like that. So load demand in the winter was actually higher than in the summer because we had no air conditioning. In the summertime, it was pretty low load demand. So big loads in the winter, very little sunlight in the winter. So if we were a standalone system, we'd need a much bigger system to meet the load when we have it, right? So that's how that works. It's just a different process for sizing your array for a standalone system versus a grid-tied system. Okay, so just understand that difference. And while I'm talking about differences here and changes, because this market is always evolving, one of the things we touched on Solar Noon Tuesday today is the state of Nevada, the Public Utility Commission, just approved demand charges for residential customers. Now, that's going to be a pain in the butt. And that is probably going to be something that is emulated by other public utility commissions because it has a great end result of the utility being able to say they've lowered the cost of electricity while charging you more money. So that's the goal. That's their goal. And if you're not familiar with what a demand charge is, this has been long in commercial customers where the utility says, we're going to base your costs on the 15-minute increment during the month where you pull the most power. Not on how much power you use over the month, but what is that biggest load demand for a 15-minute period. So the demand charges can be significantly larger than the cost of the electricity. So their argument is whether you use a lot of power for 5 minutes or 24/7, we still have to provide the infrastructure to deliver that load. So we're going to charge you for it. Now that's their rationale. My argument counter to that would be if my load demand is less than the service you've already committed to provide me, 200 amp service, for instance, then who the hell cares, right? You're not having to put any more infrastructure in. I'm using, but they don't care about that. So anyway, so now we're starting to see load demands based on that. That's going to make everybody crazy. And I know this has more implications for you guys at SOPEC because you're dealing with comparative billing. And that's going to throw a whole wrench because let's say AEP puts something like that into play, they're going to come back and claim, oh, no longer are we charging 23 cents a kilowatt hour, we're only charging 16 cents. Oh, but we're still having demand charges on everybody. So the net effect is 30 cents, but they're still going to claim what they're going to claim. So your explanation is going to be tougher to show competitiveness. Let me say, the other thing that they just did in Nevada is they're basing net metering on 15-minute increments as well. So they're putting in time of day pricing. So the net metering is going to be changing on almost in real time. That's going to cause huge amounts of confusion from everybody. Some other utilities are going to increasing excess charges. The net result of all of this is the utilities are really trying to make it for you not to be their customer. We're going to see a steady increase in standalone systems. That's going to be the net amount. Unless you can give me a reason for connecting to the grid, if you make it difficult for me to connect to the grid, there is a significant portion of people who are simply going to opt out, especially as the grid gets more and more unreliable. And we talked about that, the projections of 100-fold increase in power outages and things like that. So again, something to be aware of, prepared for, because the grid as we know it is changing and changing pretty dramatically. One other concept, which is maybe a little bit new to you, is the concept of ripple. And ripple is simply that if you think about it, as you're changing DC current into AC current, you're taking the waveform of that current from a flat line to a sine wave, right? So you're going from flat to a sine wave. Well, all circuits are there and back, right? So that wave is coming back to its original source and it gets reconverted back to a DC current. But the ripple is the echo of the sine wave, right? If it's not done properly, there's a little bit of an echo. And that echo is going to cause a rise and a fall in voltage, very subtle. So what happens when the voltage rises and falls? The amps rise and fall as well. So if you've got a motor connected to that, a DC motor, it's not going to be going boom. It's going to go, it's going to get that kind of variation. That causes things to wear out. So that's the ultimate result. Things are not running as smoothly. They're wearing out. How do you deal with it? Well, you deal with it like you deal with most things. Bigger wire is usually going to solve the problem. So we deal with that with voltage drop. We deal with that with voltage rise. We deal with the ripple. If you put in bigger wire, solves a lot of problems. So I just mentioned a term voltage rise. That might be one that you guys have missed in your reading. But that's a concept that's kind of interesting. It's basically voltage drop in reverse, where we know that as power travels a distance, some of the voltage is lost due to resistance, right? So if that distance is long enough, and we see this in a lot of our rural communities, for instance, at our farm, the connection from the house to the grid, the meter is stuck on a pole right out next to the road because the co-op doesn't bring the meter all the way to your house. They say you're responsible for everything from the meter, so we're going to stick the meter on the property line. Now you get to put 400 feet worth of wire, into your property, and it's not our problem. So 400 feet away, well, if I've got an inverter, or let's say a microinverter, and it's designed that it has to match the power from the grid exactly. But if I've got a significant voltage drop as the power is going from the inverter to the grid, it's got to start at a higher voltage in order to, by the time it hits the grid, to be the right voltage. Well, if that's significant enough, it may kick that voltage outside of the operational range of the inverter. The inverter only operates within a range of plus or minus 5% or so of the grid. So what happens, and this happens fairly commonly, if your system is close to a substation, right? Because the substation has the same issue. They're wanting to deliver power for miles. So they start out at a higher voltage, knowing that by the time it gets to the end of its system, of its range, the voltage is going to be significantly less. So if you're located near a substation, the voltage of your grid is going to be high already, right? And now you have to be higher than that in order for that inverter to kick out the power. Okay, so that's something that you have to be aware of. So how do you deal with that? Well, bigger wire, right? Reduce voltage drop. If you reduce the voltage drop, you also reduce the issue of voltage rise. Now, we ran into a situation like this in an install in Pennsylvania, which was kind of interesting, using microinverters. And when we installed, there were like 15 microinverters. When we turned the thing on, 11 of them were working just fine, and 4 of them weren't working at all. They were showing that they just simply were not functioning, which was weird. So contacted Enphase, and the customer support guy was there going, oh, let me take a look at your system, because they can monitor it from a distance. And they said, are you guys near a substation? And the homeowner's like confirmed, yeah, it's just around the corner. He goes, well, the inverters are kicking out too much. They're outside their operational range. That's why you're right on the border. And some of them are fine, some of them weren't. He goes, let me adjust the operating range of each of those inverters. So they were able to adjust them remotely to expand that range slightly. So that was kind of an interesting thing. I was saying, to him, well, shouldn't these things be smart enough to figure that out and just do it automatically? Instead of plus or minus 5%, we go to plus or minus 5.5%, and then we're okay, but they weren't at the time. They probably are now. So anyway, so that's voltage rise. Voltage rise and ripple, couple of terms you may not be familiar with. Okay, I'm sort of going through this thing. Then we get into safety. Safety is one of those where we always say it's job one, but it's always left to last, So there are a lot of questions, deals with safety. Ladder climbing is an issue. How do you set, what do you do when climbing a ladder? Well, 3-point climbing technique, something you should be familiar with. That means 2 feet, 1 hand, or 2 hands, 1 foot should be on the ladder at all times. What does that mean? It means you can't carry anything, right? That's why you got tool belts. That's why you have hoists, things of that nature. How many people follow that? Obviously. Same with harness and lanyards. How do you set up a ladder? Well, it should be a 1-to-4 ratio. If it's 12 feet up, it would be 3 feet back at the bottom from where it comes in contact with the eave. It should extend 3 feet above the eave or the point of contact of the building. That allows you to climb over the top, over the ladder with step off of the ladder while still holding on to the top of it, as opposed to trying to climb up over the top of the ladder. That's just too dangerous. The ladder should be secured at the bottom and at the top. When you talk about ladder ratings, you should remember that the color coding is real for ladder ratings. You can remember that just by, I like to use the acronym REGBOY, which is basically red, green, blue, orange, yellow, REGBOY. And red being 200 pounds, green 225 pounds, and blue 250. Those were the color codings for a long time. That's why, blue is type 1, green is type 2, red is type 3. So they were in 25-pound increments. But then I say Americans discovered McDonald's and they came up with the orange ladder, right? Because now it's rated for 300 pounds. And that is, well, they started with type 1. So now this is type 1A. And then they discovered drive-through windows. So we had to have the yellow ladder, which is rated for 375 pounds. And that's type 1AA. And who knows, we'll probably have a black ladder here pretty soon called the Cardiac or something, and it's going to be rated for 500 pounds. But that's our REGBOY at the moment, and they should be secured at the top and the bottom. You should also be familiar with lockout, tagout, what that means. And that's fairly standard in any kind of industrial system. But basically, lockout tagout it basically says, notify anybody who's involved, mark the thing, and lock it so people can't turn back. If you're working on a component, you should have some way of making sure it doesn't get turned on while you're working on it. You know, they use those little clips in an industrial situation where you can simply lock the breaker. If I'm working on something at home, I use a very, very simple lockout tagout where I simply just tell everybody in the house, hey, I'm working on this circuit or whatever, don't touch it. Then you go to the circuit breaker, you turn it off. Then I'll put electrical tape over it just to indicate this isn't off by mistake. And then I put a sticky tab right next to it saying, hey, don't touch this. You know, I'm working on it. And that's a very simple lockout tagout. That's all that it is. Then you should be familiar with plan views. Plan view is just telling you from an aerial perspective, what does the site look like? You're going to need that for permitting. 1-line drawings versus 3-line drawings. You need typically the 1-line drawings for permitting. There's an example of that in the book. 3 lines, they're helpful if you're hooking things up because they actually show you where every wire goes. You know, here's where the positive goes, here's where the negative goes, here's where the neutral goes, whatever. And that's very helpful. Okay, I think we're coming to the end. Anybody have any questions as we wrap this up? If you haven't finished the online course, try and get in there. If you're having problems, I've had a couple of people contact me saying, hey, the system it's not telling me I'm done. Even though I did all of the units, it's not giving me the little green check mark on everything, every single one of them. If that's the case and you've got a compulsion about completeness, you know, let me know and I can mark them all done. You know, that way you can generate a certificate because it will not allow you to generate a certificate of completion for the course, the online course, until everything's checked off. So now you have to have achieved an 80% on every quiz in order for that to be considered finished. So even though you took the quiz, if you didn't get 80%, it's not going to count that as done. So anyway, that's all I can think of at the moment. Anything else from anybody? Otherwise, I shall see you on the 1st, 2nd, and/or 3rd. And take care. If you have any questions, just send me an email.
Can I count you in for lunch with us?
Yeah, it depends. I'm trying to be a good fruitarian, vegetarian type, so that's
Talk
up
more
to you.
with you later about it then.
Yeah, otherwise I'll just bring something. If you're going to order pepperoni pizza, I'll sit there and smell it, but I probably won't eat it. So
Okay.
I'll be envious. So
All right.
all right, take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.